Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And this afternoon, our special guest on Cool Your Heels with Lillian is Sangita, who is coming to us from a new organization called FairVote. So, good afternoon, Sangita. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, Lillian.
Well, you're very much welcome. Not very many people know about FairVote, so could you please just give them a little background and then why FairVote came into being?
Sure. FairVote was founded by our CEO and president roughly 28 years ago. It's been leading the charge on innovative solutions to voting and elections for the last 26 to 28 years. And we've been working on a number of different issues, including voting for 16-year-olds and several other issues. And more recently, FairVote has been focusing on ranked choice voting.
And I also understand that you are trying to really spread across the United States to let people know that the old system really isn't working as well as it should, and that you offer them a better alternative to elect their officials.
That's right. The method that I'm talking about that we promote and advance, ranked choice voting, is just an upgrade to our current system. It allows voters to vote and rank their candidates in their priority ranking, so that someone with a majority wins. So the candidate who has the most consensus and who's the most viable candidate rises as the elected official. That is the system we are promoting.
And I think it's pretty fair because I think what it does is it levels the playing field of how qualified the particular candidate is. It's not how wealthy they are and how much money they can throw into the vote and to get the word out, but more as the candidate has to really appeal to the voters that they're there for them.
That's right. That's exactly right. Our voting system as it stands fails voters, in our view. Whenever there are more than two candidates, our current voting rules break down, essentially. Ranked choice voting is a simple solution, as I said, to this problem that makes democracy more fair and functional and can significantly benefit voters.
And I also think that you have more of an opportunity to hear what these candidates have to say. They have to be a little more, I believe, sincere in what they're offering to the people than what is really going on now. I think that this would be a wonderful experience or experiment to try for the presidential elections and for the senators and for the congressmen, because in ranking them, people really have to know what these people are offering them. So it's not just so much a popularity contest. It's more like, is this person really going to stand for our values and promote what we believe is essential for a good life?
That's right. If we take the example, of primaries, ranked choice voting ensures that voters get to decide who the most viable candidate is, not someone, so they don't have to vote strategically, thinking about who are other people going to vote for. They can actually vote for themselves without risking the election going to the least popular candidate. So what that requires when candidates are running their campaigns is it requires them to build consensus in order to win, ensuring whoever emerges from the primaries or the general election has the broadest support, and as a result is the one most capable of winning the general election.
Yeah, I think that would have been a fairer way for the candidates, for example, who lined up to become president for the Democratic Party, and the one or two people who try to be more representative of the Republican Party than just the present person who is now running. And I think that if they had been ranked, I'm pretty sure Biden wouldn't have gotten the nomination.
Well, it's hard to say. The Democratic Party was so divided. At one point, there were 25 candidates running, I believe. It dropped very quickly, but at least until just a couple of months ago, we had 5 to 8 candidates running. So when the Democratic Party was so divided this year, they could have easily ended up with a candidate that lacks the broad support and reflection of the party to win the general election. We could say that about the 2016 Republican election also. They may have dodged that, the Democratic Party may have dodged that bullet this time, but it's still an accident waiting to happen. Regardless of the party, it could happen with both parties.
It doesn't matter which party it is, but I think it'd probably be more equal and probably more fair if people had the right to rank the candidates who are lining up to become president or vice president or whatever, because I think that a lot of time people want to conform to what their peer group is doing. During when Reagan was running for president, I don't know whether you were born yet, but when Reagan was running for president, there were a lot of people who voted for him because of his identity as being an actor. And that's the only way they knew of him. They were not aware of his political achievements or what he did or how he did it. They didn't have that kind of information. So I think this way you really kind of have the candidates more exposed. There's more of what they're representing being seen and heard by the public to make a more informed decision who they think would do a better job for them.
That's right. Earlier you mentioned that candidates have to campaign with a bit more sincerity. What they do need to do through ranked choice voting is because someone with the broadest support has to win. So you cannot play to the polarizing views and be pitting your opponent against your principles. You actually have to go out and campaign and say to the voters, I would really like to be your number one, but if I can't be number one, can I be your number two choice? So that you not only get your number one choice, but those who don't see you as a number one candidate have actually ranked you as number 2 or 3. So those voters who have, those candidates who get the least number of votes, when those votes are redistributed, they come to you. So by default, ranked choice voting creates an election climate and a campaign climate where the candidates have to appeal to the broadest base, and those are the candidates who will win.
And in a way that makes sense, because you certainly want the support of most of the Americans who are going to put you in office. And while majority rules in some cases are a good way of doing things, just because they're winning majority doesn't mean that they have all of Americans being concerned for all of the Americans' concerns or problems. So it's just not dedicating yourself to the upper class or the wealthy, and everybody else you can forget because in your mind they're not worthy of your attention.
Right now we have a system where, because of the way our elections are held, and because you can, let's take presidential election, because you can only vote for one candidate, that if there are 3 people running and someone gets a 40% vote and other 2 candidates get rest of the votes that are split and shared, the 60% is split among the 2, the person who won with 40% still doesn't have 60% of the country's or the voters' support, and they still win the election while majority of Americans don't support it. That is not fair. What ranked choice has designed by design, ranked choice voting eliminates those kinds of scenarios where someone wins without majority vote or most of the voters liking that candidate. So when you come to office and you're governing without a consensus. That's not fair. That's against our democratic values.
That's what I think too. And I do know that many people have come and complained to me that, well, I don't even know why I bothered voting, because the person I wanted in there, who I believe is the more qualified candidate, couldn't even get into the front door because the other one sort of overwhelmed with leaflets, and he promised us things that we all know he's not going to act on, but when he's saying them, it's more of a way to buy the people who are going to vote for him.
That's right. Our elections and campaigns are now driven by the wrong incentives, money in politics, and polarization. So by positioning yourself against the opposite view of your candidate, you can still win. I can just share my personal experience. I had recently become a U.S. citizen after living here for decades, and I voted for the first time in the 2016 election. This country and American democracy is still looked upon by the rest of the world as one of the greatest experiments in democracy. I came to vote. This was the presidential election. There were three choices, and once I voted, when I was given the choices on a ballot with a ballot, I felt that my real voice didn't count. I had to vote strategically, and some of the candidates I would have wished to see on the ballot weren't even on the ballot because this was they couldn't even get to that stage. So this was sort of a turning point for me, where the whole experience of voting in this country, the greatest democracy that there is still, was an underwhelming experience. And so I began to look for other solutions. And, if we were to implement ranked choice voting in presidential primaries, we would do away with that system. You can actually vote for someone you really want. Let's say there are 5 candidates running. You can actually vote for them 1 through 5, and someone with the highest number of votes actually wins.
And I would think that's a fairer, because people are idealistic in some respects when they take a look at the voting system that we have set up. And I do understand why the rest of the world feels the way it does, because when this system was set up back in the 1700s, 2/3 of Europe and Asia were ruled either by kings, emperors, or power people with their power classes and keeping them in power. So the idea that every man was considered equal, because it took a long time for women to get the vote in this country, that all men were equal and that they had a right to vote, was a real novel idea. But I think that as the years have progressed, like other great powers, corruption has crept in. And it's very difficult, I think, for us Americans to take a look at our system and really admit something is wrong, we need to fix it.
That's right. And one can call it corruption or having the wrong incentives and money in politics and all kinds of special interests who are influencing our elections. So what ranked choice voting does is that we believe Americans deserve to vote for the candidate they really want, not just who they think other voters are voting for. And so the system we're advancing helps do that.
So when you go out, how do you go and set up your additional outreach? Because I know you're in 10 states now, and I know that you want to try to cover the whole United States. So how do you go about doing it?
That's a really good question. We are a small nonprofit. We're based in Maryland, and our founders and our board, some of the other leaders across the country who have been promoting ranked choice voting have been doing this for a while. U.S. used to have ranked choice voting until early 1900s. What we are doing right now is there are several cities across the U.S. that are actually using ranked choice voting, and those cities are Minneapolis, St. Paul, San Francisco, Oakland, New York City just adopted ranked choice voting to use that for elections next fall in 2021. So it's a very exciting year for us. It triples the number of citizens who use ranked choice voting in the U.S. And we continue to promote ranked choice voting. Our vision is that this method of voting is used in all types of elections, as you mentioned at the early part of this interview, for presidential elections, to elect our congressional representatives and the Senate, and also at mayoral elections, city councils, school boards, you name it. All across the U.S., this is the fair way to elect our leaders who represent us.
I think you should take it into the school systems.
Some of the school
and start
systems,
teaching the kids about the value, because this is a value system too.
Mm-hmm. Many universities use them actually now, and some of the school boards also use them. But your question was about outreach. So what we are doing is, in fact, currently we are engaged in a long-term strategic plan as an organization to really take this reform to the next level, as I like to say it, to the next orbit, because the last 3 decades of work have been really have brought this reform to the point where it's really caught the imagination of the American people. So in New York City, with 8 million voters using ranked choice voting for the first time next year, that's really big. And 4 states in the U.S. Are using ranked choice voting in their Democratic primaries. Those states are Kansas, Alaska, Hawaii, and Wyoming. They are using ranked choice voting. We believe both parties need to use ranked choice voting to put the best candidate forward. Both the Democratic and Republican parties would be they'd be more united and more likely to win if they were to use ranked choice voting. So we continue to do our outreach within the political parties. We continue to work with state legislatures, and we're currently developing a strategic plan where, how do we take this reform from, something that's championed by a few professionals and other champions across the country and, volunteers to the next level where more Americans learn about this and demand this from our system.
And I think it's a kind of a reawakening or a rebirth, if you want to put it that way, of people taking a good look at their political system. Now, was this movement started by younger people, or was more a senior type person who thought, well, maybe it's time we try and do something because I don't like what's going on?
Our founder, he's in his late 50s, almost 60. He started this organization roughly 28, 30 years ago. So he was young, but he also built on what the U.S. was doing back in the early 1900s when ranked choice voting was used in several elections. And if you look across the globe, Australia uses ranked choice voting now, Ireland uses it, and it's used in many countries and in many forms. So we're riding the coattails of some of the other countries and some other leaders who've done this work in the past or the past century, and we're building upon that.
Well, it seems to me it makes sense to try and do something. If you take a look at the grassroots of how the Tea Party was formed and how quickly it became acceptable, and now it's a powerful party, I can see something like this really making a difference in today's current political atmosphere.
That's right. It would reduce polarization, it would build consensus, and it would help those who are not represented have a representative go to Congress and work for them, on their behalf. So this is a fair system from all standpoints, for all parties. It doesn't favor Democrats or Republicans, or independents. It's actually the fair way to run elections, and it's competitive, where you have to build consensus in order to win.
And I do really believe that it will also enable the candidates to really, make themselves understand that if they want this position within the political system, they're going to have to work for it. They're going to have to change their game plans and their strategies of how they're going to reach out to their constituents and assure them that they're making a difference. In other words, they really have to do their homework.
That's right, because of the way the system is designed, where without broad support and most voters voting for you, there's no way you can win the election. So by doing that, by design, you must appeal to your constituencies and your broad base. So even if you don't get 100% of the vote, you must appeal to the masses and to the broadest support. So you cannot be paying attention to the wrong incentives or those, who make the highest campaign contributions. For example, you actually must appeal to the voters and take on their interests.
And that would, I think, be a giant shift for our country, really, to hear the truth coming out from these candidates of what they can and they cannot do for you, and they will be judged accordingly. And I think they should. So they're being judged on their merit, their respect, their trust, and their ability to get the job done, which is why we're putting them in there in the first place.
Right. And their re-election would depend on what they're able to deliver on their promises. So I would think that you make promises that you can keep, because the voters are going to vote for you if you're able to deliver on them.
I think so. It's too bad you can't think of a way of removing politicians when they fail to live up to their own expectations.
Well, because right now we have a system where politicians can choose their voters, not the other way around. Ranked choice voting eliminates that.
Yeah, because you're appealing to a broader audience.
That's right.
And that's what makes the difference. You have to address all of the Midwest, not just the people in the particular counties or cities that you know will support you no matter what. And I think it's a little more difficult because it's harder for you to really buy off an audience.
Right, and we also have the issue of gerrymandering, where politicians are drawing the lines to make sure that they win elections and they choose their voters. With the ranked choice voting, that becomes less possible.
So, Sangita, please tell everybody where they can find FairVote on the web, and tell them again, remind them again where they can find it, because I do know you're in Alaska and New York, but let people know, because sometimes people need to be reminded a couple of times before the information sinks in. And any contact information you want to provide?
Sure. You can find more information about FairVote at fairvote.org, FAIR vote.org. There's lots of information on ranked choice voting and other solutions that we offer. I should just announce that a business magazine called Fast Company, which promotes and covers news around growing companies, private companies, had an award for one of the best ideas, and we put in our idea for ranked choice voting, and we were one of the finalists. This was something that was announced today, and we're kicking off a week of action on Sunday. You can find more information on our website. Please join us at the kickoff event on Sunday, May 5 p.m. Eastern. this Sunday, and you can learn all that's going on with ranked choice voting across the country. Our main office is based in Maryland, but we have activists and champions and volunteers all across the country, and we need more of them. So we would love to share more information about ranked choice voting and Week of Action and how we can equip you with better tools so you can promote this in your own city and your own state. Please visit our website, fairvote.org, and join us for Week of Action next week.
That sounds terrific. And ladies and gentlemen and adults of all ages, when you come over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com, menu on the right-hand side, look for Cool Your Heels, click on it, and the MP3 should be posted there. Also, if you're technologically not with it, with the rest of the country, we have something called a sizzle line, which is a phone line. Use the number provided, and you'll hear the interview immediately. You can also hear it on Amazon, Alexa, on Spreaker, iTunes, Apple, Google, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all over the place. So you shouldn't have any difficulty in hearing it. And before you go away and stray, Valerie had this to say in 1941, all our foes are mortal. Thank you all very much for listening, and remember, until next time, please stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.